ॐ सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ Good evening and namaste. Welcome to this series of talks on the architecture of Bhagavad Gita. These talks are organized as a part of the activities of the Sanatana Dharma Pratishtana. Sanatana Dharma Pratishtana is a non-profit organization registered in the state of Florida, and it is also recognized by the IRS as a 501c3 organization. The organization is serving interested members for the past 3 years. The mission of the Sanatana Dharma Pratishtana is to bring Hindu heritage, Hindu traditions, and Hindu values to every interested Hindu or non-Hindu in the United States. The core programs of Sanatana Dharma Pratishtana serve to disseminate Hindu Dharma and Hindu philosophy. In executing the mission of the organization, the Sanatana Dharma Pratishtana is offering classes in Bhagavad Gita, Vishnu Sahasranama, Ramayana, etc. for both children and adults. Bhagavad Gita and Vishnu Sahasranama texts are published in the English transliterated editions so that both children and adults who cannot read any of the Indian languages can benefit from that. In addition to teaching the commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita and the Vishnu Sahasranama, we also teach children and adults to sing the Bhagavad Gita and Vishnu Sahasranama. Other activities of Sanatana Dharma Pratishtana include Sanskrit reading classes, periodic Vishnu Sahasranama Parayana, and Bhagavad Gita Parayana. We also organize several guest lectures by visiting Swamijis and scholars. All these programs are very well received by the members who are part of this organization. Some 100 members have registered in one activity or the other over this period. We also invite you to visit our website at www.sanatanadharmausa.org. Several articles giving more details about Hindu Dharma, Hindu philosophy, we have covered in these pages. Now let's come to the talk on hand. These series of talks on the architecture of Bhagavad Gita are an outcome of the Bhagavad Gita commentary classes we are studying for about a year and a half now. As you all know, the Bhagavad Gita is structured as a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Being in a conversation style, sometimes it makes it difficult to follow the flow in the Bhagavad Gita. Therefore, we are organizing these Bhagavad Gita architecture classes just to make it see if this makes a difference in the understanding of the flow of the Bhagavad Gita. So we believe that as an overview, these talks will help understand the context of Bhagavad Gita better and without any confusion. With this, let us get into the talks itself. Now, as we all know, Bhagavad Gita was the instructions given by Krishna to Arjuna on the battlefield. Arjuna himself was a great warrior. He had prepared very well. He was ready for this war. And fighting a war for Arjuna was not something new. He has fought wars in the past. However, he got a little concerned, confused with respect to this particular war in Kurukshetra. He had fought the same people in Virat Parva in when the Duryodhana and Bhishma and Drona, they were all in Virat Nagara trying to uncover the Pandavas, and he had fought them there. He had fought wars with for Indra with demons when he was in Indra Nagara in Amravati at the time of their forest living. However, here the difference between the Virat Parva war and here is that in Virat Parva he fought for a different cause for helping out the king of Virata. Now this is a personal war. So with that, see, there was an ownership. There's an ownership in this war, but there was no ownership in the previous war. It is this ownership that sometimes makes us confused because of the attachment. When we have the ownership, we have an attachment. That's exactly seems to be the Arjuna's problem here. Anyway, Arjuna gave various reasons for not fighting this war, as if he thought this is not dharma. That the entire first chapter was a reflection of this Arjuna's concern for fighting this war, thinking as if it is a dharma. He has to kill Bhishma, Drona, and that he thought to himself is adharma. Now, Krishna initially just gave him like a pep talk. Just it's come on, get going. You don't have these covered feelings now, cowardish feelings. This is the call of your time, and you should fight this war. Then Arjuna doubled down on it. It's even better to live on alms rather than fighting this war. Then Krishna thought the problem of Arjuna is very deep. Just giving him some encouraging words is not going to be enough. And so he decided to give him philosophical instructions, spiritual instructions. That's what we'll be looking at in these 10 classes. The Bhagavad Gita itself is in the 18 chapters, about 700 verses. In these class talks, we are going to cover about 50, 60 verses, more or less. And we select verses from various chapters to make a story out of what is being discussed. The instructions in Bhagavad Gita, they kind of go back and forth, and that causes some problem for people. But for those who have understood from the beginning, it should be a little more easier. So the purpose of these talks is to address that shortcoming or deficiency. So with this, let me share the screen here. Okay. Slideshow. So then the first instruction of Krishna to Arjuna begins in the second chapter, the 11th verse to be precise. He tells Arjuna, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Ashotya Nanmashochastvam, Prajnavadamscha Bhashase, Gatasu Nagatasumscha, Nanushochanti Panditaha. So the Lord said, you grieve for the unworthy of grief, yet speak wisdom. The Panditas grieve not for the living, nor for the dead. Now, this very statement he is making that Arjuna is not a Pandita. And by this, we can also understand that we are also no different from Arjuna, and we are also not Panditas. So what is a Pandita? That we have to understand. So Pandita, if you see the dictionary meaning, it gives this learned person, scholar, shrewd, clever, skilled, wise, having deep insight. These are all the meanings in the dictionary. And we also speak of Pandita as a Sanskrit Pandita, or a Hindi Pandita, or a Kannada Pandita, like that. So this usage of Pandita is general. And what did Krishna really mean by Pandita? That's what we need to understand. And none of these really fit in the context. Even if you say accept wise, there are people who say worldly wise. Is worldly wise is what Krishna talking about? That's what we need to understand. And so to understand what Krishna is trying to point here, we can look at the usage of this Pandita word Pandita in the other parts of the Bhagavad Gita. There are three other references to Pandita in the Bhagavad Gita. The verse 4:19 and 5:4, they have an kind of indirect reference to Bhagavad Gita, whereas verse 5:18 more or less defines what a Pandita is. This is what we'll look at in terms of understanding what Krishna meant. What Krishna meant by Pandita, that Arjuna has to be a Pandita to be not grieving. And it's our experience also that someone like we care for, we love, they pass away, we grieve. So to that extent, we are as much as Arjuna in most aspects of it. So what does the 15th, 18th verse of the 5th chapter say? Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Chuni Chaiva Shwapake Cha Panditaha Samadarshinaha. He says here, same sight a Pandita has for a humble Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. What is discussed here is a variety of beings, living beings, humans as well as animals, that have different levels of evolution. And when you have all these different levels of evolution, beings of different levels of evolution, Krishna is saying a Pandita looks at them equally, same side. He treats them equally. He understands that each one is as important as the other. Now, in our own experience, we also experience some taratamya. Those who are very highly accomplished, we look differently from those who are not highly accomplished. So to that extent, this applies to us also. So what is this same sight Pandita has? How should we understand this same sight? So here, equal sight of a wisdom, wide spectrum of living beings is suggested by Krishna. So cultured Brahmin means his highest level of evolution. He has studied a lot of scriptures, and he has understood living to the best of the level. Cow is a helpless animal, but harmless. Elephant is a very powerful, could be a harmful animal. Dog is less evolved than the elephant and cow. And a dog eater, somebody who makes a living out of eating dog flesh, is considered to be at the bottom level of our evolution ladder, if you will. So Krishna is saying that all these people, all these beings are treated equally, or this Pandita looks at all of them as equal. So we have to really understand this. What is that this Pandita that sees equality in all of them, equanimous? That is what we need to look at. So here we have a person who is observing these five beings that Krishna suggested. The five beings, from a Pandita, from a highly educated, cultured Brahmin to a dog eater. So this right now, Arjuna and all of us, we are differentiated sightedness, whereas Pandita is the same sightedness. So being differentiated by sightedness means we look at different beings, different forms, and make our judgments of those beings, and we treat them differently based on those judgments. So he is seeing here, when he is seeing a Pandita, he sees that as that person as a Pandita and treats that person as a Pandita. So what is shown here is in the picture in his mind is the different beings of different forms, a cow, an elephant, a dog, etc., etc. Now, what does Krishna really mean by same-sightedness? How to understand this? Now, before this, let's come to some analysis, trying to understand where we are. So how should I understand? I'm not a Pandita now, according to what Krishna is saying. If I am not a Pandita, who am I? What am I? That understanding we need to get a handle on so that we can understand to become a Pandita, what else I have to do? What is the scale that I have to climb in order to get to Pandita? And to that, I have to understand where I am. My starting point, if I know, I can design a set of disciplines to go to where I have to go. That is the goal. Now let's try to understand our daily living. In our daily living, we make statements like I'm walking, or we never say my legs are walking. I always say, we say I'm walking. And at the same time, if I have some problem in my legs, I say I have sore legs. My legs are sore. That's what we say. So if I say my legs are sore in one context and I am walking in the other context, at one point when I say I am walking, the legs is the proxy for me. I am the legs. That's what I seem to imply. I seem to behave. I seem to say. Whereas on the other hand, when I say my legs are sore, then I am different from the legs. So there's a confusion in me whether I am the legs or I am something else. Same thing, if I'm chewing or my tooth hurts, that's where we say I'm lifting this, my shoulders hurt. Those are all the expressions we do. I'm thinking, my mind tells me, I will say. So at one point, I say I'm the mind. At other point, I differentiate myself from the mind. Like that, I'm lying down, the whole body is lying down, and I want to do this, but my body says no. So, those are all expressions which differentiate or which sow a confusion in me as to who I am. So in order to become a Pandita, I have to know who I am. That's what they're trying to analyze. So I have a confusion. Sometimes I stand apart from the body organs. Sometimes I identify with the body organs. So what is common in all my statements? I am is a common statement, common phrase. So if I understand the I, then possibly I understand who I am. But we try to do this as much as we try. Our waking life during the daytime when we are awake, all these are standard examples, common examples. I cannot get to know who I am. So here, the Mandukya Upanishad, it offers an analysis, a logical analysis. Hey, you cannot know yourself who you are by your waking experiences alone. You need something more. And so the Mandukya Upanishad logically lays out the behavior in the three states, that is the waking state, the dream state, and the deep sleep state. So let us try to understand with the light of this Mandukya Upanishad, what happens when you go to sleep. Let's say we have a dream. And in the dream, what happens? I am lying down in the comfort of my bedroom. I'm lying on my bed, but I may be in another city, meeting a friend, having dinner with him. All those are possibilities. Or I'm just walking down in the street. Or it's also possible that a tiger is chasing me and I'm really, really afraid. I'm trying to run away. but my legs are failing me. All these are possible dreams. So I'm still sleeping on my bed. My body is here in my bedroom, and I have a body elsewhere in another totally different place. That means at least the dream tells me I have two bodies. It may not be in the dream state itself, but if you look at analyze from the waking state perspective, I cannot have two bodies, one dream body, another body lying in my bedroom. So obviously, the only body I have is the body that I am sleeping in my bedroom. So I cannot be the body. In reality, I cannot be the body because my body is here and the body is transacting somewhere else. Two bodies cannot be there. But the one real body that I can think of is the one lying in our bedroom. So I cannot be the body. And also this I cannot be the body is communicated through my statements, my body aches. When I say my body aches, that means I am not the body. I'm different from the body itself. So all my understanding about me as the body fails when we look at the experience in the dream state. So we cannot say for sure what else I am. There's a possibility we can say we are I'm the mind, because as I know, I have a body and I have a mind, and I have ruled out me being the body by analyzing what the dream told me. Therefore, I tend to think that I am the mind. Now, in order to understand if I am the mind, I have to go one more step. Say after the dream is over, I fall into deep sleep. And in the deep sleep, I do not even know I existed in real time. At the time I'm having a very, very deep sleep, I don't even know I existed at that time. I did not know anything at that time. If I did not know anything at that time when I was sleeping, that means my mind was also not there at that time. If my mind were to be there, I would know that what I am experiencing. But since I am not knowing anything that I am experiencing in my deep sleep, I have to conclude that my mind is not active at that time. So, just like we discussed in the dream state, anything that I could consider me at some time and not me at another time, that cannot be me. That is how we dismiss the body as not me. And by the deep sleep experience, I have to dismiss the mind also as not me, because I'm not the mind I should dismiss. Because if my mind were there, I would know it. My mind was not there. And because that I didn't experience anything. So both my body and the mind are not me. That's the conclusion I have to make, because they were there with me only part of the time. Something that is with me part of the time cannot be really me. Now, I get up in the morning. And when I get up in the morning, generally our expression would be, if I had a very good sleep, I slept very well, I was very happy. This is the general reaction to every one of us we experience. And by this very fact that I say in the morning, I was very happy, I slept well, that means I should have been there in some form. There must be a witness that observed me during the time of my deep sleep, and that witness has to be here at the time when I wake up in the morning to say that I slept well. So the continuity of this entity, this witness in deep sleep and the waking state, and also we could infer from the from this analysis that this witness was there in the dream state also. I will come to that a little later. So there was an entity that was there in deep sleep that I did not know at that time because my mind was not with me. And that entity is telling me in the morning that I slept very well. So that continuity establishes that there is another entity in me which is different from the body and the mind. So from the morning experience, we can conclude the following. I was there in the deep sleep for sure, because I was not, I had to conclude that I was not dead. If I was dead, I would not be in the morning telling that I slept very well. So I was there in the deep sleep. My body was not there during deep sleep. My mind was not there during deep sleep. So that means I am different from the body and mind. So I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. I'm different from the body and mind. So who am I? Now, if I have to say in the morning I slept well, then whoever is observing me in my deep sleep has to be a sentient entity. If a log of wood was there sitting next to me and observing I slept well, that log of wood cannot tell me in the morning you slept well. So that entity that was the witness has to be a sentient entity. So this witness, which is sentient, it was there during deep sleep, and it observed me sleeping well, and it told me in the morning that you slept well, I slept well. This we call the witness I. There's a witness I that was there all through it. That is the three states. Its presence is seen in all the three states, directly observable from the deep sleep analysis in the waking state as well as the dream state. See, why I'm saying in the dream state also is, see, to see anything, there should be light falling on it. If in the dream, if in my brain, if something is being observed, then there should be light falling on it. And what is that? I'm talking here symbolically. So what is it that is throwing the light on me in my brain, on the mind? That is another entity different from mind, and that we will relate to this witness I. So the witness was present during deep sleep, is present during the waking, and also it should be there during the dream sleep. So the witness is present there now also in the waking and the dream state. So this is the only entity of me that has been persistently available all through the three states, the deep sleep state, the waking state, and the dream state. So I am that witness I. However I disguise that I am, so that witness is that is the real me. This witness, as I said, has to be sentient to know at the time of deep sleep that I slept well, and to narrate it at a later time, it has to be a sentient entity. And so this witness is conscious. It is conscious of my sleeping well, and it is that same consciousness which is telling me in the morning that I slept well. So it is this witness I'm experiencing in the waking state also. How this witness consciousness, my body is inert, my mind is inert, and to get some action out of this body, inert material, as we know, it does not by itself move or act. Simple Newton's laws of motion, first law of motion. A body stays in its inert state unless acted upon by an external force. So this the waking state, all the activities that are happening in me is through a sentient entity. And that sentient, there cannot be two sentient entities, one in the daytime, one in the waking time, and one in the deep sleep time. So the same the same entity, which is conscious, which is sentient, that is there in all the three time frames, waking, deep sleep, and the dream. And by the by, that is all the time we need to make a determination. Yeah, every 24 hours, I am sleeping sometime, I'm awake sometime, I'm dreaming sometime. And you roll this out day after day after day after day after day. So from eternality, this is the case. And so this conscious entity, which is in me, which is available to me, all the three states, is there in eternality. That's the conclusion we can easily make, because the eternality is a, sum of these addition, the waking state, the dream state, and the deep sleep state. So the body and the mind being inert, the only entity that is sentient is this witness. So, yeah, like if you say in the waking state, if somebody takes a knife and cuts my finger, I feel the hurt, I feel the pain, but a log of wood does not feel that pain. So obviously, that same sentient entity that was there during the deep sleep is now giving me awareness during the waking state also. So this witness consciousness acts through the body, acts through the mind and body to make this body an enliving entity, an empowered entity. I'll give an example. See, the iron filings by themselves don't move, but if you bring a magnet close to it, then the iron filings get moving towards the magnet. Like that, the consciousness or the sentient agent in me is what makes this body act in different ways in the waking state. Now, the body is gross. I will talk about this gross or subtle little later, but at this point, let's understand so much that the body is gross compared to the mind. The mind is subtler than the body. Now, this consciousness, it so happens that it is even subtler than the mind. So, but that is what makes this consciousness to work through the mind. Mind is capable of interacting with the consciousness more than the body, because the body is gross. Just like, you cannot mix water and oil. Oil and oil can mix, water and water can mix. So the mind being subtle can mix with consciousness, or come into association with the consciousness, and then the mind through the prana. Prana is the power, that physical power that we have in our body. So it is the mind that enlivens the prana to do all the actions. If I want to throw the ball, where to throw the ball, how far should I stretch my arm to throw the ball, what force I have to use, what direction I have to use, all these are being executed by the prana, and the mind helps in putting together the whole package. So this is so far so good, that we have understood that what I was thinking of the body and mind, I'm not just limited to body and mind. There is a third component, which is the sentient or the conscious component. And that conscious component is what is pervading the time in all the three time frames. Therefore, it pervades time from end to end without a beginning, without an end. Now, another interesting outcome of this exercise is, if I sleep very well, I tell in the morning I slept very well. Now, any one of you, if you slept very well, your own expression in the morning, guys, I slept very well. So, how is it that your experience and my experience is the same? Now, if you eat ice cream and I eat ice cream, we have different opinions on the ice cream, depending on our taste, because we are different. So, or one may say this is too sweet, another may say this is not enough sweet. Various differences come, but when it comes to our deep sleep experience, each one of us have the same experience. Now, logically speaking, that is possible only when that consciousness in you and conscious in me is one and the same. So, this consciousness appears to be different in each one of us. That's the same consciousness where we are having. We will summarize these and then move on to that. So the three predominant states, waking state, I am the body, that generally I have, that conclusion I can make. In the dream state, I can make the conclusion I am the mind. But in deep sleep, in real time, I don't know who I am. Having not known who I am, when I wake up in the morning, I know I existed in the deep sleep. So that waking state experience, waking state report of the dream deep sleep experience, that tells me that a witness is to be inferred. There was a witness that was there at both times, and that a witness is to be inferred from this exercise. Now, what is the nature of the witness? It must exist in waking and deep sleep states, and also as the on the dream state. So some Sanskrit word sat. Sat means existence. It in the Vedantic terminology, anything that exists means it exists forever. There is no like the body doesn't exist forever, the mind doesn't exist forever, but this witness consciousness, it exists all the time. So that is called sat. Then it must be aware. It must be sentient. Because that is what helps this to observe me in the night and say in the morning that I slept very well. So that must be sentient. That sentiency in Sanskrit is called chit or consciousness in English. It was blissful in deep sleep. It's all of our experience that is very blissful in deep sleep. So who is this experiencing this bliss? Not the body, not the mind, because they did not exist. So the witness must be blissful. That is the ananda. So the this witness consciousness is Satchit Ananda, Satchidananda, is said to be its three characteristics. It exists all the time, it is conscious, and it is blissful. So if we try to analyze from this, who am I? In the waking state, by my body, mind, and consciousness, witness consciousness are all acting together, are all available for any activity. If you look at the dream state, the body is not available, but the mind and witness consciousness are available, are there. And in deep sleep, the body, mind are not available, whereas the witness consciousness is available. So it's only in the witness consciousness is the only entity that is existing in all the three states, and therefore I am that witness consciousness. Now, who is this witness consciousness? So the real I is my identity in the deep sleep state. So I am that witness consciousness. When I say I am eating, it is really the witness consciousness that is enabling my eating, because the mouth and every organ of the body is inert. By themselves, they cannot participate in any action. The mind cannot, being inert, cannot help in any action. It is the witness consciousness, that is the one that can help me eat or do any activity. So the witness consciousness is who I am. That is the real I am, because that's the only one entity that is available 24/7. So what is this witness consciousness? From the Linga Purana, we have this statement: "Etapnoti yadadatte yachati vishayaniha yachasti santato bhavaha tasmadatmeti kirtate." This entity is called Atma, which is the experiencer in the waking state. In the waking state, it empowers the sense organs and the sense objects, experience of the sense objects, and therefore the waking state experience, that is echapnoti. And then, and then it beholds the sense objects in dream without the use of sense organs. If you see the dream, we are only recalling some experiences of the waking state, and therefore the dream, what helps the dream even go through, it is this Atma, this witness consciousness, and therefore it beholds the sense objects. I can be eating the ice cream, or I can be riding on a helicopter, whatever I can be doing in dream. That is all be done without those sense organs coming into action. And therefore, that is another aspect of this witness consciousness enabling the dream happening. And then independently and eternally exist in deep sleep. So he sustains ceaselessly. So this witness consciousness, which takes part in all the three states, that is described as Atma. Tasmad Atmeti Kirtyate. This entity, witness consciousness, is called the Atma. Then one more data point we have from the Tattvabodha, Shankaracharya's Prakarana Grantha. Stula Sukshma Karana Sharirad Vyatiriktah Panchakoshatitaha Sannavastatraya Sakshi Sachidananda Swarupaha San Yastishtati Sa Atma. So, Stula Sukshma Karana Sharira. In the Bhagavad Gita, we don't talk about the Karana Sharira or causal bodies. So let's not worry about that. So the one who is distinct from the gross body and the subtle body. For the time being, let us remove the causal body. So the one who is distinct from the gross body and the subtle body, we know is the witness consciousness, as we have gone through the analysis. And then another condition is who is beyond the 5 levels of experience. We have the body experience, walking, all those physical activities that we do, that is the physical body experience. And then we have the prana experience, hunger, thirst, yawning, sneezing. These are all prana level activities. That's the second one, the second level of experience. The third is the mind level experience. We can think so many things. So that's the mind level experience. And then the fourth is the intelligent experience, the intelligence level experience. We discriminate good from the bad. All those, we solve problems using our intellect. These are all the intellectual experience. And then we experience happiness. We experience sorrow. We experience sadness. These are all the Anandamaya level of experience. Those are called 5 sheets in Taittiriya Upanishad. That's what Panchakoshat Itaha. That is beyond the 5 levels of experience. So that entity, which is different from the gross and subtle bodies, which is beyond the 5 levels experience, because this is, we have already determined that this witness consciousness is anything is different from all the inert levels of body presence, and being the witness of the 3 states that we have just ourselves understood, that this witness consciousness is the witness in all the 3 levels. So that which is existent, Sat, that which is conscious, that is Chit, and that which is limitless, Ananda, Ananta, they are kind of used interchangeably. Here, that limitless is described by, the Ananda is described by limitless. Only when you are limitless can you be totally happy. Even a little something different from you causes you fear. So that limitless and Ananda, that we are connected. So such an entity is called Atma, or the self. So this is the second data point. So from these two, one is a Shruti statement and there is a Smriti statement. From these, we come to understand that the Atma, the witness consciousness is called the Atma. This I am the real Atma is I am. And we have also determined that the Atma of everyone is one and the same. We'll have to do a little more explanation on that. So the individual experiences in waking and state and dream state may and will differ for everyone, but the individual experience in the deep sleep state is one and the same for every living being, be it an animal, be it a human being. In the deep sleep, you don't need like any other support. The deep sleep experience of a beggar sleeping, a homeless beggar person sleeping on the ground on a roadside, or a person who is sleeping on most expensive bed you can think of, and you're sleeping comfortably in a very air-conditioned room, the deep sleep of that person, or a mother, she lost her son. She was crying and crying and crying, and finally she was so tired, she used the son's dead body as the pillow and she slept. Can somebody mute? So the deep sleep experience is one and the same for everybody. So therefore the witness in everyone is one and the same. Same witness appears to be different in different beings. It somehow, I seem to think my consciousness is different in your consciousness, because we equate the physical level activity as being different. We equate that. No, it's not the same. It's not different. It's the same entity. The witness is the same entity in every one of our beings. And that is what Krishna says in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Avibhaktam cha bhuteshu vibhaktam iva chastitam bhuta bharta cha tagneyam grasishno prabha vishnu cha. He says, avibhaktam, the undivided. Here, the word is gneyam. Gneyam is what need to be known. That need to be known is called a gneyam. And what are we trying to find, know now? Who am I? Who am I is to be known, and that gneyam, avibhaktam, it is undivided in all beings. Vibhaktam iva chastitam, it appears as if it is divided. It is not divided. It is seems to be divided. That to be known is the supporter of beings, Bhuta Bhartra, Rasishnu, that is the one all-consuming, Prabha Vishnu, that is the creator. So it's from the Atma comes all the beings. That's the Shruti statement. We will not get into that in detail at this point. So this one that needs to be known, who am I, appears to be divided, but it is not divided. Like if you take space, and you in space, the space is undivided from end to end, undivided. But if you put a pot there, then the part space appears to be different from the big space, or the room space appears to be different from the big space. But when the part or the room is disassembled, that space in the part or the room merges with the uh, big space seamlessly. Therefore, that shows that the Atma is even more subtle than the space. And so this Atma is the same in every one of us. This Atma being the same in every one of us, this Atma, the different terms are used in the literature, if you see, to describe particularly in English. In all Sanskrit texts and in our vernacular texts of India, you see the Atma as Atma, but in English, it is referred to as self. Self is one word you will see. Consciousness is another word you see. And witness consciousness, these are all different authors use different words, because they, particularly when they write for Western audience, they want to convey that meaning of Atma, and so they use this word selfless, self or consciousness, etc. So these are all synonymous terms. They don't differ as they are used. They are not different. So this is how we will describe the pictorially show Atma. Like the sun which throws light, the Atma throws light into our activities. That is not physical light, but think of it as a light of knowledge. So in our discussions through this Bhagavad Gita, we will use this picture to show the Atma. And why this gold color, we will see that later on. Now, what is the nature of this Atma? It is immutable, indestructible, and decaying. These are all meanings I have taken from verses 17 to 29 of the Bhagavad Gita, second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. It is immutable, undecaying, avyaya, avyakta, avinashi. These are the terms used in the text. So it basically is, it stays as is without any modification. That's what we will ultimately see, that all pervading, a space is pervading, all pervading, and this Atma, a space is only a part of the Atma. So if you see the Purusukta, there it says, Padosya Vishwabhutani Tripadasya Amritam Divi. Only a part is what we see, the remaining we don't see, all pervading, indescribable. It cannot be described through speech. How can you describe Atma? Something, speech is so limited. From the limited, we are trying to describe an unlimited. The text says, no, that's not indescribable. It neither kills nor gets killed. Now, this is the logic that Krishna is using here to Arjuna. You think you are killing Bhishma and Drona, and if you look at the Atma level, it is neither killed nor gets killed. So you need not worry about Bhishma and Drona. Similarly, unborn, undying, eternal, permanent, these are all identical terms again. If anything that is not born will not die, therefore unborn, undying. Eternal, because it is unborn, undying, it's eternal and it is permanent. And weapons cannot kill, fire cannot burn, water cannot wet, wind cannot dry. If you take a sword and swing it in the space doesn't get divided into two pieces. So like that, if you cannot even break the space, how can you even break Atma? So that is none of the, like you pour water, you put a sprinkler in the space, that space doesn't get wet because of that sprinkler. So like that, the Atma is not, it doesn't get wet by water. It will not be dried by wind. So it is unmanifest, incomprehensible. Unmanifest means our sense organs cannot perceive that. The sense organs, our eyes can see, ears can hear. So these five sense organs cannot touch the Atma through the sense organs. Incomprehensible means mind. Mind cannot comprehend this Atma. So does not undergo modification. Again, is a variation of this unborn, undying, eternal, permanent. So after saying all this, Krishna says in the 29th verse, what a wonder it is, nobody gets it, he says. So anyway, these are the attributes or the characteristics of this Atma, nature of Atma. Now, this is the again the background of this. Now look at this. This is the Pandita sees. The Pandita sees when he sees these this Brahmin, this dog, this cow, this elephant, and or this wicked person, if you will. He sees not the body. He sees the Atma, because Atma pervades everywhere. He knows, the Pandita knows that the body and mind are not the person. His real person is the Atma, and therefore he does not see the names and forms. He sees only the Atma. This is what he sees. And if he sees the same Atma that is in him, in everybody else, obviously he is same-sightedness. He sees that Atma only. So the Atma of a devil is the same as the Atma of an angel. That is a conclusion we can make out of this. This witness consciousness being the same in everyone, and the deep sleep experience is the same of everybody, and that is the same Atma in everyone. So one who is not a Pandita, I'm seeing a dog. That's his claim. When he sees a dog, he sees the dog. He doesn't see the Atma. Whereas a Pandita, he does not see the Atma. Of course, as we said, it cannot be comprehended by eyesight, but he experiences the Atma because he has undergone the disciplinary exercises required to experience that. He ignores the name and form. He sees only in here. When you see that picture of the dog is what is registered in him. In him, what is registered is not the form of the dog. It is the Atma that is registered in him. Okay, I'll take one more slide and then we'll stop today. So this is what happens to a Pandita. When he sees all these objects of different nature, from good to bad or however you want to categorize it, in him he sees only the Atma and he doesn't see the names and forms. And this is what Krishna is telling to Arjuna. Hey Arjuna, you think Bhishma and Drona are bodies? No, they are not bodies. They are the Atma. And to be a Pandita, I have to see myself in everyone. And when I see myself in everyone, that same Atma pervades in me, pervades in you also, then I become a Pandita, equally seeing everyone the same. So Krishna's instruction to Arjuna is, you will ignore the names and forms of Bhishma and Drona. You will know them as Atma, the same Atma that you are. With this, let us stop here today, and we'll continue in the next class. It's a good point to stop here, and then we will continue in the next class. Let me stop sharing here. If you have any questions, is there any? Okay, there is one question here. Arjuna got confused and did not want to fight. How about other Pandavas? Particularly Dharmaraya, as the eldest among Pandavas. Perhaps Dharmaraya needed to receive this Upadesha, Bhagavad Gita. Why did Krishna choose Arjuna over Dharmaraya in this instance? It is Arjuna that raised the issue in battlefield. It was not Dharmaraya. And that is obviously Krishna was the charioteer for Arjuna, and therefore it was Arjuna's concern for Bhishma and Drona. It was not Dharmaraya's concern for Bhishma or Drona. That's a conclusion we can make. And probably, if you want to extrapolate, Arjuna was a better candidate than Dharmaraya. Dharmaraya, though, was established in Dharma very much. This requires a certain level of preparedness, and Arjuna is, if you look at the story of Naranarayana, Arjuna was a rishi before his birth as Arjuna. So therefore, we can say that Arjuna was a better candidate for receiving than Dharmaraya. All right. Another next question. If the Atma is the same in everyone, then why the actions are so different in angels and devils? Good point. This we are going to study in detail as we go along. Now, the reason why the different actions are different is, say, the Atma is only a witness. We have seen that in the deep sleep. Atma does not take part in any activities. It's only a witness. Like the same sun provides light to the entire earth, but different people use the sunlight for different activities. So what promotes my action as different from somebody's action? Somebody is only because they're product of my mind and intellect. I perceive things differently. I make decisions differently from other people, and Atma only enables all these activities that happen in me by being a silent observer. Atma is not a participant in any action. Atma is only it's a platform, if you will. It provides an activity base for people to perform just by throwing light. And when I say throwing light, not the physical light, the consciousness light, if you will. And therefore, that is what makes actions happen. So with that, the different actions are the result of different gunas. We will talk more about the gunas as we go along. That's what makes the differences in the actions. Namaskara, Swamiji. Yes, Swamiji.
Very nice presentation. Thank you.
Yes, Swamiji. Thank you very much.
Many things became clear.
Oh, Swamiji, you are saying that to me.
Very good, very good.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you.
Swamiji, it is your greatness to make everyone
Feel
look
good.
important.
Everyone has something to contribute. Original, very good. Namaskara.
If we see, if a Pandita sees all as equal as Atma and not as an individual animal or an entity, say if the same Pandita, if an elephant or a tiger is charging at him, if he says, look, I'm not seeing the elephant or the tiger, and shouldn't he think that he should move away from the path of the elephant or the tiger? And thinking, yeah, it's Atma, so I don't care. So can he walk around?
Good
He's not a
question.
Pandita in that case.
A good question. Swamiji has answered this in previous classes. You see, the seeing is one thing. You see, there are two levels here. One is showing love and compassion and equality. And the second thing is to recognize the nature of different beings. Just now I said that different minds and intellects have different abilities, and different animals have different powers. And you recognize that difference at the body-mind level. Swamiji says, Tiger Maharaja, I will salute you. That is how you respect the physical form of the tiger or the elephant. The Ishvara present in the tiger is Tiger Ishvara is the same as the Ishvara in me. But that Tiger Ishvara applies its power, the power that the tiger has, again, the Ishvara is only an observer. You look at that Atma, that Ishvara, and recognize it and salute that, but you recognize the differences in the actions. That's a good question. That's what you grow into once you start reading, understanding this spiritual aspect of this our scripture. Swamiji, ನೀವೇನಾದ್ರೂ ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ? Swamiji, you want to add more?
Swamiji mute ಆಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
It is Sri Ramakrishna explained it with a parable. In a Gurukulam, some boys were studying, and the teacher told the boys that God is present in all, including animals and inanimate objects and things. So one day, some boys were working to collect firewood. A wild elephant came, and it had a wild elephant, and the Mahout could not control it. Mahout was asking all the people to get away, out of the way. All the boys ran away to safety, but one boy stood there right in front of the wild elephant and started praying. Oh Lord Ishvara, you have come in the form of wild elephant. Salutation, namaskara to you. The wild elephant does not know what is Ishvara or God. Wild elephant took the boy in a trunk and threw him aside and went away. Later on, when the boy was treated, when the teacher asked him, why didn't you move away like all other boys did? The boy said, sir, you said God is present in all, including animals also. So I was seeing God in the wild elephant, so I stood there praying. Then the teacher said, it is true God is present in all, but when the Mahout was asking you to move away, why didn't you see the presence of God in the Mahout? You saw elephant Narayana, but you did not see the Mahout Narayana. So when you apply these principles, God is present in all, you have to treat everybody alike, Samadar Shitva. When you apply this, we have to use a little bit common sense and be careful. So we have to, the elephant does not know, the wicked man does not know that God is present in him. So we have to see God's presence, but he is not aware of it, doesn't believe in all these things. So we have to stay aware from a distance, you have to show respect. God is present in you, but you are not aware of it. So from a distance, I bow down to you, you stay there, I stay here. So we should stay away from evil company, evil people.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji. All right, let's close for today. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat Sarvam Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Swamiji.